Followed by a man with dead eyes. When I was 18 years old, my family fell on hard times. We lost my childhood home, moved into the only apartments we could afford, and had to relocate after 6 months. With no home set in place, we split up and stayed with friends while we house hunted. The family I stayed with lived near a sketchy area, but the house itself was in a nice little pocket of the neighborhood. At that time, I was in my first semester of college and did not have a car. I would walk a little over a mile in the mornings to the light rail station to catch to a bus, and walk back in the evenings. Nearly half of the distance to the house takes place on a main avenue known for its sketchiness. Sex trafficking, prostitution, shootings, etc. I get a few honks here and there as I walked, which surprised me as I am a bigger girl, but I never felt unsafe. That is until I had a close encounter. I remember that it was still light out when I left the light rail station, so I must have not had a class that evening. As I was walking the first street that led into the neighborhood, I heard a honk. I looked straight ahead and continued to walk. As I was turning onto the street, a car pulls up to my left. Initially, I didn't pay much attention to it, as the area was fairly busy itself. However, my eyes dart to the driver as I hear the window rolling down. He appeared to be an older Middle Eastern man, sporting a lazy smile. We made eye contact and I immediately look away out of habit, but I could see that he was trying to get my attention. I glanced back and he motions for me to come closer. I smile and shake my head. Growing up, my mother drilled politeness into me, which I appreciate in general, but also resent at times like this. I'm a shy person and a people pleaser. I don't like to say no or disappoint anyone. That said, I wasn't about to go up to this dude's car again. He motions for me to come to him. I shake my head, laughing through my nose, still smiling politely. I then continue to walk home. My guard is up, but I'm not too worried. If I walked straight for a half mile, made a right, and then a left, I'd be at the house. I took this route every day, and usually zoned out as I walked. That's why it took me about a quarter of a mile to realize I was being followed. I wasn't sure if it was the same vehicle because I tend to look down wherever I go. However, this particular truck had passed my peripheral vision enough times to ring my cautionary bells. I gathered some courage to confront the driver. With a frown set on my face, I turned to the truck, mentally prepared myself to say something, and it was a different person. I blinked, felt silly, and nodded as we made eye contact. This guy appeared to be younger and of Hispanic descent. I gave a hesitant smile, and he just stared. His face held no expression, and I remember how dark his eyes were. He was far enough away that I couldn't tell if his pupils were dilated or not, but it felt like they bore into me. Now, eyes have always creeped me out in a way. I truly believe that they're the windows to one's souls, and for what I could see, they were just empty. It feels dramatic to say that, but I could sense something about him was off. He didn't say anything, only looked at me. I remember my smile faltering, and raising an eyebrow in a silent "Can I help you?" He jerked his head as if to call me over. I shook my head and continued to walk again. He drove ahead of me. I sighed in relief and quickened my pace. As I come up to one of the many intersections, I see him parked near a ditch on the left, his car facing my direction, meaning he had to have turned around at some point. I realized that it was on purpose, and at one of those calming chills roll over through me, the kind you get when your body is trying to alert you of a danger. He sees that I've noticed him, and he drives past, slowly staring. At this point, any politeness in me is gone. He jerks his head again, and I firmly respond, "No." His blank expression didn't change, and he continued to drive past, down a road that I knew would lead him behind me. Instead of going straight, I went left, as I knew the alternate roads I could take to get to my destination. The streets in the neighborhood were empty, and it didn't take him long to figure out where I was. As I mentioned before, I'm not the best of shape, so I wasn't moving very fast, even with adrenaline pumping through me. As I forced my body to move, I focused on my irritation instead of fear. I went over the description of him and his vehicle in my head. He looked to be in his mid-20s, tall and thin, medium-length black hair with an attractive face and dark-hooded eyes. He drove a small, older beige truck with purple and pink lines down the side. I lost count of how many times he had driven past me. I had a scowl set on my face, and I didn't look down anymore as I walked. As he passed, I would hold the stare with my chin up, but it did nothing to deter him. I continued walking, and he would be there jerking his head, motioning for me to come to his car. He kept a distance, albeit a small one. He'd creep by, and when I turned to glare, he'd pass me and come around from another direction. The neighborhood is grid-like, so it was difficult to know exactly where he'd come from next. Now, as I mentioned before, times were rough. I did have a phone on me, but my service had been shut off. I relied on Wi-Fi. I knew I wouldn't be able to call my friend who lived down the way, and that thought brought forth the anxiety that I was holding at bay. By this time, a little rush of adrenaline that enhanced my bravery was faltering, and I felt genuine fear. I began scanning homes, looking for anyone. I saw a corner house that always stood out to me when we drove out of the neighborhood. It felt safe. When the guy in the truck passed me again, I took a chance and ran up to the house. I was met with a disgruntled older man. I explained my situation and asked him if I could please use his phone to call my friend. When I pulled out my phone, he grew suspicious and asked me why I need to use it if I had my own. I explained that my phone was off, but I needed it to find my friend's number, and I didn't have it memorized. I could tell he was still wary, but he brought his phone to me and let me make the call. She didn't pick up. I left a shaky message, hung up, and that's when the tears started flowing. They may have helped my case, but what solidified it was that moments later the truck passed by the house. The older man said, "Shit, is that the motherfucker?" And I confirmed that it was. He believed me then, and offered to drive me to my friends. I should have been wary of this stranger, but despite my mind being on overdrive, I could sense that he was a kind person, with good intentions. I felt safe with him, so I threw caution out to the wind and took him up on his offer. That drive is a blur to me. I can only remember thanking him profusely afterwards. I went inside and saw my friend sitting there. I felt anger, which I knew was misplaced. I asked her why she didn't answer, and she said it was because she didn't recognize the number. I felt so mad at that moment I broke down crying, releasing all the tension and fear I had felt, and explained what happened. We didn't contact the police. Nothing had really happened. I was just spooked. Also, for some reason, I never thought to look at the license plate, something I still regret. Sometimes I wondered what could have happened if other people in the area had experienced this, and if they didn't get out of it unscathed. After the fact, a friend from church gave me her pepper spray and told me to keep it on me at all times when walking in the area, which I did. I lived with that family for a month or so more, and while I get an occasional honk, I never saw the truck again on my walks to and from the light rail station. I still remember where that house on the corner is, and think about that old man and how thankful I am that he decided to answer his door that day. The Old Woman. Longtime lurker, first-time poster and foreign. Please bear with me. These are 3 different stories that are all part of one experience, with one especially creepy woman. These incidences happened throughout the span of 14 plus years. Describing the type of neighborhood I lived in would be integral to this story. When I was 6 years old, me and my family, parents, 2 brothers, and grandparents, lived in the ghetto part of the city. It was a poor neighborhood housing several ethnic groups of immigrants. Break-ins, random violence, and drug abuse were common occurrences, so whenever I went out to play with my friends, my parents never let me wander out of the apartment complex, out of their line of sight with our apartment window. Moreover, I wasn't able to walk to or from school without being accompanied by family. The school itself wasn't far from our house, a 10-minute walk. The way to the school passed a big ghetto-ish playground, which I loved, that had long uphill paved trails leading right to the school. My parents never let me go to the playground alone with my friends, and that really frustrated my little 6-year-old brain. Given the nature of our neighborhood and me being a girl, I had heard endless speeches about the horrors of wandering off alone outside, stranger danger, and all that jazz. I was a pretty gutsy kid, so I didn't really take my parents' word very seriously. Being a kid, I didn't quite understand why my parents always hovered over me so much, not letting me be a kid and just go outside or go to school alone, when my best friend did so every single day. So one day, I decided I'd be one-upping my parents and come back completely alone from school to gain their trust. They worked till late that day. My brother was in high school, and my other brother was in the army. I knew the person who'd come to pick me up at 2:15 was my grandma. I planned I planned this all very carefully. School was ending at 2, and that gave me exactly 15 minutes to get back home and surprise Grandma. The moment the bell rang, I ran back home, taking that paved trail that goes through the playground. I was one super excited ball of energy. It'd be my first time going home alone, even just outside alone. I was pretty friggin' pumped. That didn't last long though, because as soon as I hit the paved trail, I saw her. She was a tall, lanky old woman with bright blonde, dry hair, a super wrinkly face, and completely dead-looking eyes. She was wearing all black and carrying all sorts of colorful shopping bags. Now, I had seen this woman outside before. My parents talked about how creepy she is, and how she probably is like meth up 24/7. I saw her and I froze. A feeling of dread took over me as my first super exciting experience of walking home alone got completely fucked up by this lady. I froze too late because she spotted me and started to approach. "Hey little girl, do you want some candy? I have the best candy in this town." Her voice was raspy, like someone who had spent the vast majority of her life downing Marlboro cig packs. The closer she got to me, the worse I felt. I told her I'm not interested and nonchalantly skipped by her faster than walking so I could continue home. "Come on, just try one, you'll like it. You're a very pretty girl. My friends will love you." She kept walking behind me. She was following me. I was terrified. I tried containing myself to not show her I'm scared. I thought it'd make her angry and she would hurt me. I walked a bit faster and told her again, I'm not interested." She starts screaming some nonsense. I ignored her and walked faster. At some point, she stopped screaming. Soon after, I could hear her breathing and felt her fingers on my arm. I instantly knelt the fuck out of there, running down the trail, crying. As if being touched by that old banshee wasn't terrifying enough, I heard her running after me. As I turned my head to see where she is, the sack of old bones was legit sprinting behind me. As far as her old legs could carry her, imagine seeing an old, creepy-looking, dressed-in-black lady running after you. It was such a frightening sight for my 6-year-old self. After running for what seemed like forever, I finally got to the playground. The old witch was just around 10 meters behind me. At the playground, I saw my grandma on her way to school to pick me up. She was pretty shocked to see me, obviously, but mostly because I was hysterically crying. I pointed at the old lady, who was now trying to make it seem as she was just lightly jogging, and told my grandma about the candy and the chasing. My grandma is a very non-confrontational person and is easily scared, so her only reply to the lady was, "She just gets so emotional and overexcited at things," greeted her goodbye and took me home. The old lady just stood there as we walked away, waving at me and staring at me, smiling a creepy meth teeth smile. That was the first encounter with her. The other times I saw her outside were when I went somewhere with my parents. She always stared at me, waved, and smiled. Fast forward to my 15-year-old self. I'm chilling at my grandma's, in the same neighborhood. My parents and I moved to a far better neighborhood when I was 12, and I was coming by my grandma's house every day for music theory lessons. Someone knocks at the door. Grandma, being the extremely paranoid person she is, bolts in and looks through the peephole. Guess who it is? The old meth banshee. Grandma proceeds to ask her for her intention through the door. The old meth banshee claims she couldn't hear her well through the door and to open it, now knocking a tad more furiously. My grandpa was sleeping at the time, and waking him up was something neither of us wanted, so she opened the door just as far as the chains on the bolt could let her. Creepy old lady pokes her face through the door, offering to sell us motherfucking eggs. We're both already thoroughly spooked by this woman, and so rejected her kind offer of eggs. The cryptic cunt wouldn't let us off the hook so easily, though. She shoved her foot in between the door and the frame and didn't let my grandma close the door. We were both absolutely horrified as she turned to me and said, "You're that pretty girl. Can I buy eggs from ya?" We were in complete friggin' shock. The woman tried pushing the door open, and she was no match for the chains. She starts fumbling at them with her disgusting bony hands. She shoved her hand inside our apartment to try and pry open the chain. Grandma told me to call the cops and keep away from the door, but I was not having any of that. I kicked Banshee's foot from between the door and the frame and closed the door full force on her fingers. She starts screaming and going insane, pounding at the door, yelling how she's going to get us, how she's going to send her big scary friends to burn down our place, and do many colorful things to me especially. The door bang continued for several minutes, until one scary neighbor we had got out and scared her off. My grandma didn't leave the house for a week after that incident and got even more paranoid every time I came by. My last encounter with that creepy woman took place a year ago. I was 20 years old at the time, driving back to my old shady neighborhood to pick up my grandma for grocery shopping. I parked my car in the dimly lit parking lot and waited for her to come down. Having been instilled by my parents' superb paranoia, I always locked my car doors, which proved to be very helpful that night. It was about 9 p.m., very dark and very quiet. I got that weird being watched type of feeling, so I turned off my flamboyant K-pop music and sat there silently, watching. I could make out a lanky, dark figure coming towards my car, and what do you know, it's her again, looking exactly the same as 5 years ago and 14 years ago, dressed in black, bright blonde hair, same exact shopping bags. She got close to my car and tapped on the window on the passenger side. "Pretty girl, roll down the window." "Fuck no." I motioned her a no with my head. She then goes to mess with both door handles on that side of the car to try and open them. Frig me sideways. When her druggy brain processed the fact that these doors were locked, she slowly walked to the other side of the car, my side, dragging her hand on it as she goes. She taps on my window and tells me she needs a ride to the hospital. I tell her no, to which her response is messing with the door handle on this side. I am thoroughly freaked out. I see my grandma behind my clearly friendly meth banshee coming in the parking lot. She sees what's happening and freezes. I text my grandma to silently approach the car from the other side and quickly get in, while I entertain creepy woman and simultaneously reach out to open the passenger door. That she does, and our plan works without a hitch. We're both safe and sound inside the locked car. Problem was, my trunk isn't locked with a key, and we only bother to do so when the car is parked outside, not when we're driving. Meth grandma was enraged, yelling at me that I'm rude, going through the "my gang will fuck you up" routine. She stands too close to the car, and I'm scared of running over her foot. God forbid I have to pay insurance money. She throws a fit, hitting the car with her bags, looking friggin' demented. I notice she keeps her feet really close to the car and is walking to its back to the trunk. My jaw dropped to the friggin' floor as I saw her open the trunk, slowly and literally crawling into it, giggling like a friggin' maniac. Boy, did I floor that poor gas pedal, because the old banshee fell on her decrepit ass and screamed bloody murder. Me and my grandma also screamed. Our scream were muffled with cheery Korean pop music as I turned on to try to make myself feel better shortly after that, which was out of our car for good. Creepy meth grandma had a name befitting her creepy nature, Lena. Everyone in the neighborhood knew her as the local creeper. Apparently she was in and out of prison and frequented a mental asylum. She wasn't harmless per se. She was known for some violent fits, but there was no record of her actually hurting someone. The closest thing being making me and all the neighborhood kids quite literally shit our pants. What was and still is the most disturbing feature of Lena is the fact that her image never changes. She always wears the same clothes, looks exactly the same as she did 15 years ago, and even carries the exact same bags. It's like a monster out of a fairy tale. It will always appear the same in your head no matter how much time passed since you've read its story. I never saw Lena again ever since our last encounter, but I heard she popped up here and there around town. My feelings towards her are mixed. She terrified me as a kid, but the older I grew, the more I pitied her. She was just an old woman who was and is completely batshit insane, off her rocker and probably addicted to several kinds of drugs. Close encounter on lonely road with man who believed lights in the sky told him what to do. I was in my early 20s, living in a small town, and driving to my sister's house one night after dark. I was doing the speed limit when a car with very bright lights came up behind me, right on my bumper. This was a narrow street, definitely no passing, but he flashed his high beams and then roared around me and cut me off. I had to slam the brakes so hard my engines almost stopped. I had a big old Plymouth sedan. This guy was in a Vega. Yeah, it's been a while. I high-beamed him back because he was going very slowly. He sped up, and then after about a minute slammed on his brakes again. This time my car died. I was desperately trying to start it. I saw him getting out of his car. It really is true that things slow down and you feel numb and clumsy. I'd seen this in movies and thought it was fake. It isn't. I was also trying to roll up the window as he was beating on the headlights, then the hood. Then he lunged at the door. I realized it wasn't locked. Manual locks you push down. I got it locked just in time, but he reached through the window and tried to punch me, but I had pulled away and he barely got my shoulder. He had fingers wrapped over the glass as I rolled up the window. He pulled them out. The engine finally fired up, and he went back to trying to punch the headlights again. I memorized his tag and was tempted to just pin him there, but I really wanted to get away. The cops found his fingerprints on the inside of my window, and I picked him out of a set of photos. They told me he was a real problem. He would throw a brick through a store window, for example, right in front of a cop, and then claimed he was mentally ill, voluntarily go in a couple days and then come out again. He said that lights from outer space told him what to do. The cops didn't believe him. They told me he had escalated this time by attacking a person, and they were going to make sure he got committed. I had a campus cop who was a good friend. I told him the story, and he ran the tag so I'd at least know the guy's name. The cop was astonished when he was told that license was not available. He got determined and kept checking until he found out the guy lived with his parents, was in his 30s and didn't work, and that both parents had retired from something very important in Washington. When I didn't get a summons to the court, I called the detective, who agreed that it should have been issued. He checked and was furious to find out that he never got a notice either. The guy had pleaded guilty to a lesser charge and off he went. I was very nervous for a long time because I had to drive past that house to go to work. Very modest house for people with such clout. The detective kept in touch, told me the guy had been arrested again and committed, but would be out again. It was a revolving door for him. Flash forward about 4 years, I'm walking out of a shop with a friend, and after a few steps he says, "Do you know that guy?" I glanced up and got this terrible feeling. My friend said, "He looks like he wants to kill you." The guy had stopped in his tracks as he was approaching the store we just left. I recognized the face. My friend said something challenging to him and we moved on. The guy went into the store, but he was glaring back. He only saw me for a very brief time in poor light years ago, and all this he remembered me. I will never forget that look. I never saw him again, but I later found out he had become too much for his parents to handle and had been committed with no date of release. I always locked my car doors after that. I was always very mindful of traffic around me, but I couldn't help but wonder about his parents, who thought it would be a great idea to inflict this monster on a small town. An all too close encounter of the worst kind. This story takes place early in the year of 2011. The little ones had just departed for school an hour or so before, when I suddenly began to hear our dog, Matilda, barking furiously at something. Matilda is a very good guard dog, a little too good, as I'll find her barking at a leaf as it falls from a tree. Still, she sounded pretty miffed at something, so I went to check it out. I grabbed a jacket and put it on as I walked out the back door to find her barking her doggy heart out at a black dog, roughly about her size, wearing what happened to be a collar that came with an electric fence, one that would sense if the dog gets too close to the boundaries and gives it a little shock. Naturally, I assumed this dog to be my neighbor's dog, Carly, and took her by the collar as I led her back to her owner. These neighbors had had an electric fence set up for their 2 dogs, and often when it would rain, they would be able to get out due to the rain messing with the connection. Seeing as how it had rained the night before, I figured that this had to be Carly, and was surprised to see a truck come around the corner down the street and stop abruptly. I immediately was on guard and contemplated shouting for Matilda. When I remembered that I had rechained her out back, a man got out and was all smiles as he walked up, saying hello as he did and introducing himself, saying he lived just down the road and, well, wouldn't you know it, his dog had gotten loose. He talked for some time about the community and have you been here long, all the while getting closer. He then proceeded to talk to me about my dog before stopping abruptly and saying, "That is your dog, isn't it?" I quickly stated she was not, as I kept my distance while still trying to not come off as rude. I said she was my neighbor's dog, Carly, and had recently got loose due to the rain messing with the connection of their electric fence, and I was just taking her back to her owner. He stated that she looks somewhat like his dog, and asked if he could see her tags. I hadn't noticed any tags then again. I was fairly certain as to the identity of this dog, so naturally I hadn't thought to look. I kept an eye on him as I moved my hand over to keep his from closing on it. As my dad stepped out of the house, I had never been so relieved to see anyone in my whole entire life. The guy too quickly said, "Yep, that's her. Well, thanks so much for finding her. We better get going," as he picked her up and put her in the back of his truck and drove off. And though he said he lived down the road in the opposite direction, he was driving the other way and didn't come back. I turned and hugged my dad, grateful. He hadn't gotten work that day, and tried not to completely break down. Later, when I recounted the story for everyone else, my mom revealed to me that Carly had died some time before, and that she believed this dog must have genuinely been his. But that doesn't explain why he took off so suddenly when he saw Dad. I mean, he's not exactly an intimidating individual.